Welcome to the Dairy News and Views podcast, a production of the Iowa State University Extension and Outreach Dairy Team. Our podcast covers current educational, research, and industry tools available for your operation to manage healthy cows and calves while producing the highest quality dairy products. Thanks for joining us today on Dairy News and Views from the ISU Dairy Team. I'm Jen Bentley, Northeast Iowa Dairy Field Specialist, and I'm here today with my colleague Fred Hall, who's the Northwest Iowa Dairy Field Specialist, as we discuss today's topic, and one that is becoming more popular in the dairy world as we see more and more producers are wanting to add value to those newborn calves through a beef dairy crossbreeding program. So welcome back to our podcast, Fred.
Well, thank you very much. It's been a couple of weeks since we've been together on the podcast.
That is for sure. Yep, we've been doing some program planning around dairy beef with our dairy beef short course coming up in March. But yep, so it's good to have you back on. And we're glad to have our extension veterinarian from The Ohio State University. We're joined today by Dr. Gustavo Schuenemann. He's a professor and extension veterinarian with the Department of Veterinary Medicine, Ohio State University. So Dr. Gustavo, welcome to our podcast. And before we get into our topic here, why don't you tell our audience a little bit more about yourself?
Thank you very much, Jennifer and Fred, for this opportunity. And as you say, Jennifer, and so I'm a professor at the Department of Veterinary Preventative Medicine, and my expertise is on cattle health and management. And I devote a significant portion of my time, 65% of my time in extension. So I do work with a number of farms, small farm, like, we have quite a bit of Mennonite and Amish farm here in the upper Midwest, and more with, these large operations. And then most of the time is on precision technology, troubleshooting health problem, risk assessment on some of the farm. And I devote a significant time to build and develop human resources, especially professionals and personnel on the farm, the managers, right? And then in different topics that might go from health, animal welfare practices, and just the interaction between animals, people, and precision technology. So those are the things that I work. And 35% of the rest of my time I do teaching, especially in our senior veterinary students, and also for our senior student in animal science. And I do research, and most of my research is around transition cows, so either prepartum and early lactation.
Yeah, before our podcast here today, we were kind of discussing our demographics of, Iowa and Ohio, and it seems like we kind of have similar demographics when we talk about herd sizes and cow numbers, how that's changed over the course of the years. And so a lot of your work sounds similar to things that we're doing in Iowa when we're talking about employee training. And, I ran across your article in the Buckeye Dairy News that really kind of piqued my interest in learning more about the case study that you conducted, assessing calf death losses in a beef dairy crossbreeding program. Can you give us a little bit more background on why you chose to do this case study and how it was developed?
Yeah, great question, Jennifer. Many dairy farms, across the country are implementing this beef on dairy crossbreeding program, right? And perhaps one of the most important items out of this is, trying to add value to some of the male, calf. And any farms do need some replacement heifers, right? Some of those farms that has developed, a good program, and they do have, under control, the management, the milk yield, and the reproductive performance. So we see that these farms are already implementing, and a big portion of their cows, 60% of their cows are being bred on, with beef bulls. So one of the logical questions from some of these farms is, what is the impact on my cows? So this is something new we've been doing for 2 or 3 years now. So how is that working for us, in terms of, calf survival? One question is regarding calf survival, and perhaps I get another question regarding how my lactating cows are doing. Is do we have any effect on because of the bulls, right? And so I often receive some of these requests from the owner, nutritionists, or veterinarians, to assess performance in cows or calving, right? Looking at facilities, nutrition, the management, how that interaction with the animals. And this particular case is about the use of beef on dairy, right? For this particular case study, the owner and their advising team request an assessment on their operation and just to see, and we look at data, for a full year, right? And we look at all the bulls, the Holstein and the beef bulls, right? And just to see if there is any opportunity for them to adjust the program. But the most important outcome was, do they have any impact in my calf survival at calving, right? And that is how we developed this case study. And the most important out of this, because of some of the extension appointment and the opportunity to have to interact with, farms and professional in the field, I bring that back experience, this real question in our classroom. So the student has the opportunity also to develop the critical thinking and to see what kind of questions, in our current system we have that allow them like at the cutting edge on when it comes, after graduation, that they had to interact and work in these systems. So that is kind of the background in a nutshell and how we develop.
Dr. Gustavo, can you expand on what variables were used in assessing calf losses, calf death losses?
Yes, good question, Fred. This is perhaps the most important when you start diving into data, right? And you gotta, these are large farms that they are looking at multiple outcomes. And the most important is to know what kind of data we have, right? And because, calf losses is yes or no, so it's a binomial outcome, right? It's either yes or no. So we usually look, 5, at least the initial starting point, 5 variables, right, that are important to them, beside understanding their breeding programs, right? Understanding the breeding program is very important because how breeding is assigned to a group of cows, that can skew the data. So what that means is I'm looking at the average, right? But the average can be skewed one way or the other way. It depends on how I do the breeding assignment on the farm. So I'll explain this in a minute, right? So the first variable we look at is gestation length. This information has been known for quite a while now, right? The gestation length, they do have an impact in calf survival. The shorter the gestation length, you could expect higher, right? Higher calf losses, right? So, but there is an interaction between, the dry period length, the first one is the dry period length and the gestation length. These two are together, right? So if you have short dry period length, the shorter the dry period length, we tend to have a little bit higher calf mortality. But the dry period length is affected by gestation length. And within that gestation length is affected by twin pregnancies. It's very, very, in many farms, there is 4% twin pregnancies, but some farms, because we have changed our repro program and give more emphasis to estrus, breeding based on estrus, right? So cows have a tendency to have, multiple ovulations under those circumstances. And it is common to see 10%, 10, 12% twins, right? And cows pregnant with twins do have, they tend to have shorter gestation length. So that there is an interaction between the dry period length and the gestation length. The shorter the gestation length, also you have higher, calf mortality, and longer gestation length also have higher. Right? Remember that normal gestation length is a range, right? A number of cows, they are under the normal gestation length, but there is a number of cows that will be about 15% short. Then there is the bulk of the average cow, and then there is the longer gestation at about 8% more, right, or 10%. Those longer also to have some issues. Then parity effect. We know that heifers, first calf heifers, they do have more more problem at calving compared to multiple cows. right? And then we look at the sire, and this particular, this was actually the question. Look at my sire. We look at all the beef bulls that we're using on the farm, right? Most of these beef bulls were either Angus or Simmental crosses, right? And then we look at their Holstein bulls. And most of their Holstein bull, when they use Holstein bull in this crosses program on dairy farm, they are using sex semen. So it's just female, right? They are breeding cows to have the replacement heifers, right? The next one, those important, the last two one, that is the calendar week and the calendar month, those are important. The calendar week is just to give an idea, the intensity of the work during the calendar week, what the trend might be there that is not even associated with the bull. It's just more associated with the logistic and the workload, right? And that is for me always important, because I see always a trend either Monday, right? It's almost always on Monday, there's a higher calf mortality because it's usually a very busy day of the week. There is many things going on. And some farm might be on Thursday, right? Not on Monday, it might be on Thursday. It's because of how tasks and activities are scheduled on a farm, right? And then the calendar months give me about the idea about the variation in different seasons, right? And especially what I'm looking here is the summer effect, right? Because we know the summer effect has a negative effect in dry matter intake. And that also in prepartum cows are losing body weight. At calving, you need two things. You need energy and you need calcium. Those two things is what allow uterine contraction, and cows losing body weight, they don't have the strength to go through delivery. And usually we see higher calf mortality, but this is nothing associated with it. Whether you're using beef bull or Holstein bull is the same. And out of this context, understanding the breeding program and the sire assignment, this is absolutely crucial, because these are what we know confounder. Confounder is when you are looking at something that is being skewed one way or the other because of an effect that you don't easily see it. So in this particular case study, most of the cows, right, second lactation and up, were all bred with beef bulls, and first lactation cows, especially the first 3 services, were with Holstein bull, if I recall correctly, and then all subsequent services were bred with beef bulls. So that is important when we do the assessment, right? To do a fair comparison, right, between the beef and the Holstein bulls.
Could you kind of give some thought on the new rage is putting beef embryos in cows? How do you think that will have an effect?
It is important to do this. Here some of the concern perhaps from the individual is, in the beef side, these are two different, it's cattle, but within cattle, we've been selecting these two populations in a different way, right? That might have an effect or not, depending on what you are looking for, right? On the beef side, birth weight, weaning weight, those are important traits because you want them to be as much efficient as possible in developing, muscle, right? So what the dairy cows are in a different way. We usually don't have many. Weight is usually not an issue. What we look is for milk, right? And so what happened here is, if you do have bulls that do have really high, they have above average birth weight, but they are very, very positive in weaning weight, what happened in this, when we breed, dairy cow, you might end up having a little bit above average birth weight in Holsteins, right? The Holstein crosses, right? But this is more about selection of because in the beef bull, there is a lot of, there's a lot of breed and there is a lot of sires, right? So what we look is that, yeah, they are about in line with our birth weight for Holstein, right? They are in line for our average, birth weight for the Holstein and the farm. Usually we know that. And then within that, we select the bulls, right? And there is a number of bulls options that you can select. If you are within that range, usually you will not have a problem in calf death losses because of the sire. Usually the issue might be associated with management and some things that go on the farm, but not necessarily associated with the sire.
So Dr. Gustavo, as you're reviewing this case study and the outcomes that came out of it, I know this is, one example, one farm that you looked at, but what are some of those opportunities to reduce calf death loss when, if I'm talking to a producer who's considering a dairy beef crossbreeding program, what might be some things that I could tell them about looking at this type of system?
That is a good question, Jennifer. I personally, I see a lot of farms using Angus bulls. So right, those are, and the industry is also learning, right? Learning. This is an area that I see growing, and learning about the selection process and getting better and better and better. I see that we will probably refine more the systems. Right. And in this particular case study, if you look at the overall population, they have about 5.4% calf losses, right? And the US average, if I look at the average in the US, 5.1, right? Those are calf losses. They were born alive or died within 24 hours, right? So this is just average number. I usually don't use average number because the average number is just not a good practice. So what I tried when I developed this recommendation, I look at the top best 10%, right? What these farms are doing and how I can come up with this recommendation for the farm, right? And I have a few recommendations that we developed for this particular case study, right? And when you look at the top 10 best, farms in terms of calf survival, right? They are below 2%. Right, so there is an opportunity, to improve here. And the number one, it was just to make sure the beef sires that they were using were below or above the average or below average in birth weight, because there is a strong correlation, right, birth weight with some of the dystocia problems, right? So that was one of the most important, and then get a little bit of data on the farm, especially in calving difficulty, right? And many farms nowadays can do some birth weight, and this is a simple measure that it can take at the maternity, right? The most important after that, I just review and decide and make sure you are in line with what happened in the hosting breed. The next one is more about management, right? The management is perhaps the biggest opportunity. And the number one on management is how they control twin pregnancies. For this particular farm, they were using the classic off-cinch plus pre-cinch program, but they were using significant amount of cows with heat detection, right? This is a high-producing farm, right? They are about 90 pounds of milk average on a daily basis, right? With a 60-day voluntary waiting period. Right. So what happened when we are breeding cows on heat, right, and we don't synchronize the cow, these high producing cows, they have a very high metabolism, and that tend to reduce progesterone. It's a hormone, right, that when cow resumes cyclicity after calving, and that prone the cow to have multiple ovulation. Right. So then the number of twin goes up substantially. It could go up 50% from 4% to 8%. Right. And we've seen this trend. So this is how do I control the twin pregnancy? Because twin pregnancy are going to have two things. Right. One, the cow has more metabolic problem because they have twin, two calf. And the other one is just they have short gestation length. And we know that with short gestation length, they usually has more problem at calving. Right. So the things with that is usually the practical aspect we do it is we all know expected calving date. So, and we move these cows 10 days earlier, everything, right? So they dry off in the same way about if they are using 60 days, they use 60 days prior to calving, they dry off. But then when they move from the far off to the close up, they move the cows 10 days earlier. And because that helped the cow to be exposed longer to this anionic diet, right? Because they know they're going to have short gestation length, right? So that is one. And the other one is to increase from 60 to 70 days, in milk, their voluntary waiting period, and then to adjust their breeding program a bit, right? They need to reduce the number of twins. So what we do here is they still want to use their heat detection program, but instead of doing only 60% or instead doing 60% heat detection, we bring that to 40%, right? So that will reduce substantially the number of cows with multiple ovulations. So adjusting these three things, how we manage moving cows earlier to the prepartum pen, right? Adjusting the voluntary waiting period 10 more days, and then using a little bit more time AI, right? That those will have a substantial impact in calf survival, right? And it will reduce 50% or more the number of cows with twins. Then the other one is because usually primiparous cows do have more issues as multiparous cows, regardless of the bull. This is whether it's a beef sire or it's a Holstein sire, right? The heifers are very sensitive to that. And so we review the replacement program, right? And in that replacement program is we look at two areas. One is the first 60 days of life. They need to double birth weight. So if they are born with 80 pounds, right, they need to be 160 pounds in 60 days, right? And we keep track of that, right? We usually want to see all, 90% of the calves that they do double birth weight in the first 60 days of life. And then establish clear criteria for growth, right? Growth, especially clear criteria for growth, age, and body weight at breeding, right? And that will ensure, you have a uniform set of heifers calving, and usually you don't see many problems there, right? If you follow this, the most important for heifer is body weight growth, right? Body weight gain. That is perhaps the most important, right, trait. And two more that are associated with that is just training and employees and adjusting the protocol, especially in the calendar week. Remember, a week has 7 days and each day has 24 hours. And a number of opportunities are just there, organizing the workload and how things happen on a farm. And each farm is different, right? It requires a little bit of diving into their logistics to understand or find the opportunity. So training for personnel, and then adjusting for the summer effect, adjusting some of these heat abatement systems, right? To avoid, because the most important thing we want to avoid there is body weight loss prior to calving. And out of the two groups that are more sensitive to body weight loss, prepartums, multiparous cows or pregnant heifers are almost always the most sensitive, right? They are very sensitive to lose body weight. And what happens is they all go in labor and they don't have enough strength, right, to go through the parturition process. That happened in dairy cows and that happened in beef cows as well, right? When they don't have, for example, in beef cow, when they don't have good hay quality, right? The heifers are going through labor and they don't have enough strength. And they might see a little bit more calf mortality. But this is regardless of the sire that they are using on the farm. So that is, in a nutshell, the areas that perhaps I would suggest to a starting point to focus on the farm.
As we wrap up our podcast, any final thoughts or comments you'd like to share with our listeners?
Well, first of all, thank you, Fred and Jennifer, for the opportunity. Something that perhaps I'm going to mention, the dairy business is the art, an art is science, but the art of controlling variation and managing risk, right? This is very important. What I mean by controlling variation is controlling the things that I did mention. If we control variation, we automatically control risk. And what is risk? Dead calf, right? Or more, or less hypocalcemia, or more milk, right? That is, I think, what happened in many farms. And these little details, adjusting these little details is what makes the difference at the end of the day in many farms, right? And especially for the farms to keep them profitable.
Well, thanks for being on our podcast, Dr. Gustavo, and appreciate the practical applications that you brought to the podcast here for our listeners, whether they're producers or working in the industry, or maybe an employee that's working on a dairy farm. These are definitely things you can take back to the dairy. And I'm sure your students there at Ohio State University really got into some good critical thinking after looking at this case study too. So again, I want to thank you for being on, and I will link the article that I was referring to this podcast. So if people want to, dive into the details a little bit further, they can do that. Again, thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much, Jennifer, and thank you, Fred.
Thanks for joining us today, and we look forward to visiting with you on the next Dairy News and Views from ISU.
This institution is an equal opportunity provider. For the full non-discrimination statement or combination inquiries, go to www.extension.iastate.edu/diversity/ext.